Hello, everyone. Welcome at our core protocol sync. We'll share protocol changes from last week and plans for the immediate future. And the first one will be Ivan today.
Yeah, sure. Let me share screen. Yep. So last week, I basically merged some of the fixes for the DSN. Yeah. Before that, we basically filtered out like the relay node, and with that change, we basically couldn't connect with like we couldn't connect different plots with each other. We need to supply like each plot as a different bootstrap node. Yeah, and with this change right now, it will be still possible. Yeah, and apart from that, I just added like simple retry function for like finding peers. Uh, yeah, so something like that. Yeah, and basically with the changes, I was able to actually sync the from the SSD actually. Yeah, and as for this week, I was working on this issue. In terms of like resuming the DSN sync after the restart. Yeah, I was exploring like different filters. Yeah, and as Nazar suggested, I took a look at the cuckoo filter, and basically it seems that it's like the best option for the DSN sync restart, as like as this like in our current consensus, we'll still need to like evict pieces and that kind of thing. So the filter needs to be like mutable. And it needs to have like nice symptotics for deletion. And it seems that it's also pretty efficient in terms of like both speed and like memory usage. So for like 100 gigabytes, it's something around like 32 megabytes of space, like in the actual RAM, and it's kind of the same for a disk. Yeah, that's what I explored. Yeah, I guess I'll stop with like developing API with that for now till the sync. Yeah.
Actually,
So
that has a library in Rust for cuckoo filter.
oh.
I recall that from when I was looking at his contributions before we hired him.
Oh, well, that's great. Actually, there was like two dependencies which I discovered and looked at. There's a great collection of like different probabilistic data structures, like which is called like PD structs or something. And there's a like separate library which is called like cuckoo filter. Yeah. So
If you have any questions about that, you can probably ask him.
yeah, sure, yeah. I will reach out to him. Yeah. Um. Yep. That's
Yes, I have a question for you, Ivan. Uh, you're researching the way how to resync and restart farmer. So in major cases, in many cases, it will be just a portion of the all data that you need to get from other farmers. So my question is, do you need an additional protocol from the DSN to just limits that pieces by range, not the whole data, but only some kind of piece index hash or something like that? Because if you need to get only several pieces, if you can using this cuckoo filter determine that you need only several pieces, you don't need to get the whole range with whole data from other farmers. And remember that we already have this feature to get only a piece using this piece index hash, just a single, or just a piece without any ranges. So if you need this, let's discuss it probably after that call.
sure, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if we have time, I can elaborate on that, on things which you thought about.
Okay. Anything else to discuss about what Ivan has shared? All right, Shamil, you're next.
Sure. Let me share my screen. Last week, I fixed the last comments for the peer info protocol, which allows us to on getting these piece ranges to filter all these peers that not support required protocols. For example, bootstrap nodes or just nodes or relate nodes, anything that doesn't support required protocols. We just finished that last week. Also, most of the week I spent on our new Bootstrap node application. So we have this example in the networking crate, and I promoted to the separate binary. I added several features to this application and to the networking crate. First, it was yes, reserved peers. Those peers we need to guarantee that some nodes will be always connected to our DSN. For example, the first use case would be a set of Bootstrap nodes that has reserved peers as for each other, that they have these reserved slots to connect to each other. Also, I basically finished implementing today is connection limits for networking, and that's Bootstrap node application. It's just a limit of total connections for the node, and reserved peers are excluded from those limits. And I also created a couple of Docker files for this Bootstrap node application for several architectures, and added that Bootstrap node to our CI. For this week, I will work on that object mapping protocol to enable on farmers. To enable this protocol on farmers side. We prepared this as a request response protocol on the DSN side, but now I will implement it on the farmer side. And that's it.
One thing I recalled about reserved peers and Bootstrap nodes is something I did in Substrate recently. We need to filter those and remove the identifier, or like, if the peer itself is in its reserved or Bootstrap nodes, we need to like filter that out. Otherwise, it will try to connect to itself, and we got our service blocked because of that. It's complicated, but just make sure that
okay. I think it's easy to implement. Let's discuss it. Let's say tomorrow on our call.
Yeah, just not to forget.
Yeah, question, Shamil. So just so I understand, so this is a Bootstrap node for the DSN that we're talking about.
Basically, we have our DSN as a library, and this new application, Bootstrap nodes, is just a simple CLI wrapper around this library. So it has all the features of our DSN, all the Kademlia and all this, all other protocols, and we use it to enable connectivity in farmers, for example.
Okay, yeah, so it's like
in Substrate, we are running a node, like proper Substrate node as a Bootstrap node, and it requires storage and everything, and just processes a lot of stuff. In this case, just networking.
Okay, so this is kind of like a discoverability kind of like gateway for nodes that are blocked behind like a NAT or something like that.
Yes, simplified version. It's very easy. One file, a couple page downs of code. That's it.
So the assumption is we'll probably run like a handful of these Bootstrap servers for a testnet as well.
Connected to each other as just
got it.
Joint set.
Okay. Awesome. Makes sense.
Okay, thanks, Shamil. Let me share what I was doing. Should be this one. Okay, I hope you can see it. So the first thing was weak typing in CI. I really like it. Basically, I should have had this dot platform in the middle of parameter. Otherwise, it was just an empty string. So for AR64, it was building x86 images, and people complained that it doesn't work on Raspberry Pis and stuff. So that was a simple typo. It should not have compiled in the first place, but oh well. Then let's see. Yeah, in here we have basically had this parameter in the palette subspace that was defining whether farmer can produce a block or not. And if not, there was like a limit that only this particular farmer identity is allowed to produce a block. And before we had this just Boolean parameter that said, is it allowed by anyone or not? And if not, then the first farmer who produces a block becomes this root user. And that allowed forking on the very first block where multiple users can create this first block. And in their version of the chain, they are the farmer that is allowed to produce block and no one else. So they can potentially run different branches. With this new change, we have an enum where you can specify that identity from the very beginning. So even the first block needs to be produced by this identity. And Luchan also suggested to do some refactoring more in here because we have those parameters in the storage items and we can actually make it clearer later. So this is something we need ideally in the next version of the network if you want to launch it a similar way. Any questions about this one? Make sense? Then there was this long-running branch that has finally materialized in the pull request and was approved, where we are checking a lot of additional stuff. You can read a few paragraphs if you want. The code changes are quite massive, but the gist of it is that we are verifying all of the next digest in the header. So like when the header says that the next block should use this randomness or this salt, our fast sync will actually verify whether that next value is based on the previous values it has seen. And it will also maintain caches and it will prune the storage, auxiliary storage as necessary. It supports forks and all kinds of stuff. So this was, I worked on this for a while, and that also helped with some of the light client changes and related stuff. And this was finally merged. So this is not an entirely new work, but it was just merged 5 days ago or 4 days ago. I think we discussed it previously. Then there was an interesting trick where, due to some of the recent changes, we have changed this to build x86 images, and that means the default container Docker file for container images, it only builds x86 containers from this point, and that was tricky to test for Shamil on M1 Mac, where you have ARM AR64 architecture, and you are trying to build this. So it essentially does cross-compile, but it like breaks in different ways. This way, we are building the native image, like the native architecture for whatever machine you're running on. And if you want to use cross-compilation for the AR64, we have a separate Docker file, and otherwise you need to do something manual. So this was just to make testing easier and to make it possible for people to build on AR64 if they want to do something custom, which again, a few users wanted to do, but they failed because of this. Then this pull request was already approved from what I've seen. Yeah. This basically drops a whole bunch of different workarounds and edge cases and compatibility layers for Gemini 1B. And also there were some to-dos and there was some legacy stuff on the farmer side. There were some cleanups for the even older versions of the Subspace network, like testnets, stress tests. This basically cleans up those things. So like one of the examples would be Subspace node, where we had these workarounds that are deleting folders for old snapshots. It's no longer relevant, so we just drop in that. It's quite a reduction in number of lines to maintain. Yeah. And the very last one is a small refactoring to improve the DSN sync. Basically, what we were doing before is we were querying the plot and the mappings in batches of like what it's called. There was a constant here. Yeah, pieces per request. So we were taking these many things from the mappings database, we were sorting that, and we were reading from disk in random order. What this does instead, we have noticed with the one that this actually like request for mappings takes very little time. So we can actually request the whole thing from the database. We can sort them by offset. So you're reading disks sequentially, and then we can read it like in chunks. We are reading it in chunks to interleave with other requests. So if you're like solving or doing some DSN work, you can actually like interleave those reads between these reads. And otherwise, it's almost the same algorithm. It's just more efficient. And I have noticed about 45% improvement, but the numbers are still quite low, so it's doesn't really like solve the problem of performance, but it does improve it. So that's another change. There are still some work there is still some changes I'm working on in my local branches, but that's all I have so far on the GitHub. Yeah, next week I think preparation for the pre-stress test network and for other stuff, coming networks will be occupying most of my time. Any questions about any of this?
Actually, just one comment on the PR of like dropping the Gemini B compatibility. That also means we'll kind of like retire XNet in practice, right?
Probably.
So yeah. Just want to make sure we're on the same page.
I'm not even sure we are actually fully compatible with it. I think we just made one build and only tested with that one build. I don't think if you build current main, it will actually connect properly. It might have been broken.
Yes, before I do like connect to the XNet with the local compilation. Yeah, it works. But with this change, I'm pretty sure it no longer works.
Yeah, I mean, there were some places, for instance, in the fast sync verifications that are unconditionally enabled. There was like a special path for Gemini 1B just for that Genesis hash. If XNet has a different hash, it will not go through that. But the code is still old, so it will just break in weird ways. So yeah, I think if you can do cleanup in a separate pull request, that would be nice.
Sure. Yeah. Agree.
Okay, so I understand the takeaway from that is you won't be able to test XNet with this version or the executor until
it's unlikely that you were able at all already. So it's not like we're changing anything.
But if we did want to, what would be required to make them compatible?
We would just launch XNet 2, I guess.
Oh, we just need to reboot XNet. That's all.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. So this version of XNet is not compatible. That's really okay.
And considering these like major changes on this execution layer, I think we'll just like let current XNet run as it is until we have the like new version of implementation.
Yeah. Okay, Daria, do you have anything to share or to discuss today?
Well, my last week was spent basically digesting the various white papers, Filecoin specs, code, and so on and so forth to learn, to stand on the shoulders of the giants and see what we're going to learn from them in several aspects of proof of replication. And so I'm compiling all of that in the Notion so all of you don't have to spend all of the time on this, and I will keep doing so in this week. Also run some of the benches and tests they have to see if it's worth adapting into smaller sizes, because their default size of sector is 32 gigabyte and we want to have smaller pieces, so we need to make sure that works. And we'll proceed doing similar stuff with reading white papers and code and specs for Chia to see what we can learn from them as well.
Okay, makes sense to me. Anything else anyone wants to discuss before we close the recording today? Okay, it's been quite productive. Thanks everyone. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you next week.